All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating look into how our minds work.
So Kahneman basically says our brains have like two systems of thought, right?
Exactly. He calls them System 1 and System 2.
Okay, so can you break those down for us?
Sure. So System 1 is kind of like your autopilot, right? It's fast, intuitive, it just happens without you really thinking about it.
So like recognizing someone's face.
Yeah, exactly. Or driving a familiar route, you're not consciously thinking about every step, it just kind of flows.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then system two is more like,
System 2 is your manual pilot. It's the slow, deliberate thinking.
so like when you're actually trying to solve a math problem or something?
Exactly. It takes effort, it takes focus, it's not automatic.
So in everyday life, are we mostly using system one then?
For most things, yeah.
Hmm.
And it makes sense, right? You can't be analyzing every single decision you make.
Right, like I don't want to overthink what cereal to buy
Exactly. But the catch is that this reliance on System 1 can lead to some less than ideal decisions.
because it's not always accurate.
It can be tricked. Kahneman calls these tricks cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases. Is that like a fancy way of saying we make dumb mistakes?
Well, kinda. It's more that our brains rely on these mental shortcuts, and sometimes those shortcuts lead us astray.
Give me an example of one of these shortcuts gone wrong.
Okay, think of the anchoring effect. Have you ever, walked into a store and seen a sweater with a crazy high price tag?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right, and even though you know it's probably overpriced, that number kind of sticks in your head.
Like an anchor.
Exactly. So then, even if you see the same sweater later on sale for, say, half off, it might still seem like a good deal, even if it's still way more than you'd normally spend.
Because you're comparing it to that original crazy price.
Exactly. The anchor has biased your perception of what's a fair price.
Wow, I totally fallen for that. What are some other biases we should be looking out for?
Well, there's the availability bias. This one has to do with how easily we can recall something. Like, imagine there's a news story about a shark attack.
Okay, scary stuff.
Right, and now you might be afraid to go swimming in the ocean, even though statistically it's incredibly unlikely to happen.
Because that image of the shark attack is so vivid in your mind.
Exactly. It's available, so you overestimate the risk.
So are you saying I should be more afraid of like falling out of bed than sharks?
Well, maybe not that, but it's about recognizing that our fears aren't always proportional to the actual danger.
That's a good point. Any other mental gremlins we should be aware of?
Oh, definitely. There's representativeness. This is where we judge the probability of something based on how well it fits our stereotypes.
Oh, so like if someone's wearing a suit, you assume they're a CEO or something.
Yeah, or you see someone with tattoos and piercings and assume they're a rebel. Appearances can be deceiving, right?
Totally. This is making me feel like I can't trust my own judgment.
Well, it's not that your judgment is always wrong. It's more about being aware of these potential biases so you can, take them into account.
Okay, that's actually pretty helpful.
Right. Now, another really interesting thing Kahneman talks about is this thing called the illusion of understanding.
The illusion of understanding. What's that about?
Well, it's this tendency we have to create stories, to make narratives, to explain events, even if we don't have all the facts.
Oh, so we're like filling in the gaps with our own assumptions.
Exactly. Our minds crave coherence, they want things to make sense, and this is where hindsight bias comes in.
Hindsight bias. Wait, I think I've heard of that. It's like saying you knew something all along, even if you didn't.
Yeah, like when your sports team loses and you're like, I knew they were going to choke.
But you probably didn't actually know that before the game.
Right, or people saying, I knew that stock was going to crash after it already happened. It's easy to see the pattern after the fact.
So basically, we're all just making stuff up to feel smarter.
In a way, yeah. And that's why it's so important to, actually look at the evidence, not just rely on our gut feelings.
Speaking of gut feelings, is there a bias for that too?
Well, it kind of ties in with overconfidence bias. We tend to overestimate our own abilities and the accuracy of our judgments.
Oh, so like when you think you can totally win that karaoke contest even though you can't hold a tune.
Exactly. Or when you think you can handle one more drink, even though you're already feeling tipsy.
Oof, I'm guilty of that one. So how do we fight back against all these biases? Is it even possible?
Well, we can't completely eliminate them. They're part of how our brains are wired, but we can become more aware of them and try to mitigate their influence.
So like what, just slow down and think things through?
That's a big part of it, yeah. Engage that system 2 thinking, especially for important decisions. Don't just go with your initial gut reaction.
Less autopilot, more manual piloting.
Exactly. Now, another really key concept from Kahneman is loss aversion.
Loss aversion. Okay, tell me about that one.
It's the idea that losses loom larger in our minds than gains of equal size.
Wait, what does that mean?
Like losing $100 feels way worse than the pleasure of gaining
Oh,
$100.
for sure. It's like you get a raise and you're happy for like 5 minutes, but then you spill coffee on your new shirt and suddenly your whole day is ruined.
Yeah, exactly. The pain of the loss just overshadows the joy of the game.
So how does that affect our decisions?
Well, it can make us really risk averse, even when taking a risk might actually be the best choice in the long run.
Because we're so afraid of losing.
Right, we focus on what we might lose instead of what we might gain.
So understanding this bias could help us make better choices in all sorts of areas, like finances, career, relationships.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're naturally wired to avoid loss and then trying to think more rationally about the potential gains as well.
So don't let the fear of striking out keep you from swinging for the fences.
Exactly. Now, there's one more bias I want to touch on before we wrap up, and that's the planning fallacy.
Okay, hit me with it. What is the planning fallacy?
It's our tendency to underestimate how long things will take and how much they'll cost.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with that one.
We tend to focus on the best case scenario and totally fail to account for all the potential problems and delays.
Like when you think you can renovate your whole kitchen in a weekend.
Exactly. Or you think you can write that paper in a few hours, but then you end up pulling an all-nighter.
Been there, done that. So is there any way to avoid falling into this trap?
Well, one thing that can help is to break down big projects into smaller steps and then realistically estimate the time for each step.
So be more granular. Don't just look at the big picture.
Right. And also look at your past experience. How long did similar projects actually take?
Learn from your mistakes, basically.
Exactly. Don't just assume this time will be different.
It's all pretty mind-blowing stuff. It's like we've been going through life with all these mental blind spots.
Well, we all have them. The important thing is to become aware of them, right?
So we can make better choices.
Exactly. And understand why we sometimes make the choices we do, even when they don't seem rational.
Well, I feel like I've learned a lot today. Thanks for walking us through all of this.
No problem. It's been fun.
So as we go about our week, let's all try to be a little more mindful of those System 1 impulses.
And remember, sometimes it's worth slowing down and letting System 2 take the wheel.
Great advice. Thanks again for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And until next time, keep thinking, everyone.
But think slowly.
Exactly.